Shadow Generations is a genuinely amazing game, and if you want to see my opinion on this full game, I have made a review of it, but I want to go more in depth today on a very particular topic, and that is the replayability of the game. Because not only is it super duper fun to play it on the first go, it gets even more fun as you play it, which is something that has really been lacking in Sonic games. I really love Frontiers, but due to the nature of that game and just cyberspace not being that good, it doesn't really have that much replayability. The most you're gonna do is just kind of run around the open world randomly, and that's kind of it. But in this game, we're back to that good boost level design that really you can hone in and replay. And so we're going to focus on that today, but it's not going to be me discussing it. I have brought on a lot of your favorite creators to discuss this topic. But before I hand it off to them, I want to give an extremely huge thank you for 5,000 subscribers. I'm not going to harp on this long, but genuinely, I am incredibly blessed. Thank you for all the support, and I know that this is just the start of this channel. So let me pass it off to you, Needlemouse. Space Colony Arc.
So while everyone decided to pick later levels in the game, I want to take a look at, in fact, the first level of the game, and that's the Space Colony Arc. Now, it seems like a lot of people start to overlook this level once the game ends. In fact, I myself first did. When I first came back to replay it after beating the game, I kind of realized this was my least favorite level in the game. Not bad in any way. In fact, it's still one of my favorite levels in Sonic history, but definitely not, well, anywhere near the quality of the later levels. But when I decided to speedrun this level opened up in ways I could have never imagined before. I loved the Space Colony Arc before, but this speedrun has kind of opened my eyes to it again. The crazy uses of Chaos Spear is insane, and I myself have yet to be able to pull off all the techs that is possible for this level. My best time on this level is a little bit less than 4 minutes, and I have seen multiple speedruns that have been getting it down to 3:17. Like, it is crazy the amount of techs and strategies there are on this level that I've been trying to learn and improve. But I can tell you for a fact, I love this level. Taking that first rail at the beginning of the arc to skip half of the section, to using this platforming section later on to completely skip another section of the level, it's just crazy. And there's even a part of the level where you can just chain Chaos Control back to back to back to back and completely stop time for a very long period of time that would otherwise just be regular gameplay. And after the missile, it gets even more crazy, with you having to reach the upper path in order to use this Chaos Control path. And even in the Radical Highway bit, as linear as it is, there are so many opportunities to skip level design and so many ways to just switch from rails that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed when playing the game in the beginning. It's crazy the amount of stuff the Space Colony Arc does, and I have to say, this level is just so much fun to speedrun. I have found so many ridiculous speedrun techs, and I'm just trying to figure out at this point how to pull them off. But I know when I do, this will be by far the most satisfying level to speedrun. And yes, somehow, even more than Chaos Island, as much as I love that one.
Yo, what's good everyone? It's your boy Stickman Guides, your favorite Sonic Game Platinum Trophy Hunter. Say, do you like Sonic Heroes? I know this is G-Dub's channel, so the comments are probably going to be a resounding no, but let me fix that answer for you. Yes! Yes, you do now. That is the correct opinion. I'm proud of you guys for admitting that. Just like how Sonic Generations takes Seaside Hill, an amazing level from Sonic Heroes, and dials it up to 11, Shadow Generations takes Rail Canyon and Chaos blasts that junk up to 20. Everything you know and love from the original, it's all here and accounted for. You've got the rails, you've got the trains, you've got the switches that switch rails, the returning enemy types, man. Oh, they're so cool, and they even do little dances when they jump up in the air. It just breathes so much life into this level, especially when you've got like the smoke effects going on in the background too. It just adds to that feel. You know what? I'ma just say it. This is what Aura feels like. Now, obviously, I know none of us would hate this level, but let's just pretend to look at this from a quote-unquote unbiased perspective. I don't even know what that means. I think the biggest criticism a lot of people tend to give this level and the Heroes original is that it always felt like it was on rails, both metaphorically and literally, which is why you would expect it to be the most linear feeling out of all the levels in the game. But what if I told you that with a couple hours of speedrunning, a good majority of the rails can actually be skipped. Before we get into the Rail Canyon speedrun, I just want to say that even though I'm at the top of the leaderboards on my friends list for this level, pretty much because I'm one of the only people playing and speedrunning the level, I'm not exactly a speedrunner myself, so I'm sure the tips and tricks that I'm going to be giving you guys are just a fraction of what can actually be pulled off on this level, so this run is going to be as light as it gets speedrun-wise. Right when the level starts off, you're probably thinking, oh, this is just a linear rail section, so I'm just going to keep boosting till I get to the end. But pay close attention, this is going to be really incredible. Use the momentum of this booster to jump right away, spam Chaos Spears, and let go of the left analog stick to move faster. When you're about halfway through the rails, slightly tilt the left analog stick to the right, and then once again let go of the left analog stick and boost. Keep spamming Chaos Spears and jump, and you should be able to homing attack onto the springs if you did all of that fast enough. That took me a solid 3 hours to figure out, and I gotta tell you, there is no better feeling in the world than pulling that off. The next section right here, it's a classic skip. You can jump and then boost onto the rails without ever having to flip the rails, and that way you've shaved off a couple of seconds. I'll admit, I'm not actually good enough to pull this off, but if you jump at these rails at the right angle, spam Chaos Spear, and then homing attack onto the next set of rails, you can actually make it, skipping those 3 ag pawns and waiting for the pulley to drop. When you get to the next set of rails, rail hop until you activate the closest switches, so that way you can get up to the top route, get the Chaos Control Box, and use it right away. Well, actually, I haven't quite figured this out yet exactly, but it seems like depending on when you hit your Chaos Control, could actually affect whether or not the enemies on the sides actually explode, therefore adding to your Chaos gauge. And this level is just so awesome for that, because while other levels typically just require you to attack enemies to get the Chaos gauge up, the way you obtain it in this level is more indirect, and I think that adds more skill to it. I've had a run where I froze time for pretty much the entire grind rail section, so you freeze it right there. Then when the enemies explode, you get another Chaos Control so you can freeze time. Then while time is frozen, you can pick up the Chaos Control capsule here to once again freeze time when that regenerates. And when you get unfrozen, and you did that correctly at the right time, you're going to get another Chaos Control gauge so you can freeze time again. And it's just so genius, man. After jumping on the rail to get up top, you might think that going forward is the optimal route, but actually, if you decide to explore and break these barrels right here, you'll be rewarded with a spring that takes you up to a faster path. You can Chaos Spear the spike enemy really early and get over to the other side, and if you defeat all the egg pawns in this section, you should have a Chaos Control ready. Typically, what the game requires you to do is use Chaos Control to jump over the train, so that way you can get up to the Lightspeed Dash section, but there's nothing that prevents you from entering the Lightspeed Dash section midway through and making it to the final rail. And I love what the game does here. Right when you start to feel like the rails are starting to get a little bit monotonous, Black Doom's like, "No, Shadow, we're going to Radical Highway. Admittedly, the level does start off pretty linear, but if you get to the bridge, you can jump onto the rails on the right and then homing attack the final enemy to get through the hoop instead of going through that homing attack chain to make it a lot quicker. While skydiving, you will notice there are some hoops to take you to a rail and another path, but I just feel like it's quicker to get through this section normally. I love this so much because with the emphasis on the homing attack chain right here, it's probably going to lead you to taking that spring, but if you were observant enough, you would have noticed that as you got to the end of the hallway, if you jump to the right, there's actually a way faster path. Get the rings to fill up your boost gauge, Chaos Spear all the Doom Starfishes, and interestingly enough, you don't even have to homing attack Black Doom at the end. You could just keep going, and funny enough, it actually makes it faster because the second you touch the ground, you blast straight into the dash ramp. You'll then be seamlessly transported back into Rail Canyon, right where you left off. Side note, I love that they make you boost straight into this enemy and blow it away because it just shows you how much stronger you've gotten since the Sonic Heroes days when even slightly touching those things would deal damage. Don't forget to take the middle rail to get the Chaos Control item box to freeze time. As you go down these next set of rails, you're going to notice that the middle rail is going to cut off, so you're probably thinking, move to the rightmost rail, take the hoop, and then keep going forward. But there's a way faster way. If you jump and then homing attack the middle rail right there, you'll get through this section way faster. Then, for the grand finale, you're put into a section reminiscent of City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2, where now you're boosting away from the trains and you've got a rail hop to make sure you're on the right path. It isn't exactly the most challenging section, but it's a lot of fun. And I absolutely love what they do with this ending because they put you in the exact same scenario that you were in at the end of Rail Canyon in Sonic Heroes. You're on a set of rails, you're next to this structure with a roof on top with the goal ring right there, and in the original, it always felt so cool to be able to jump over the rails and jump on top of this roof that it made you feel like you weren't supposed to be there. But in this game, they knew you were going to be here because not only did they put a collectible here, but they also have a spring at the end, making sure you would take this path as the optimal route. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I love Rail Canyon.
Now, we all know the tragedy of Sonic 06. What was supposed to be a huge step forward for not just the series, but gaming as a whole, ended up not only being one of the worst received Sonic games of all time, but one of the biggest failures in gaming as a whole. This was mainly due to a lack of time given to the developers. They were incredibly rushed by higher-ups to get the game out by the holiday season. So, what would have happened if they were given enough time? What if the dev team were able to cook? Well, for one stage in particular, I think we finally know. And it's absolutely glorious. Kingdom Valley, Act 1 specifically, is such an incredibly brilliant level. It takes so much from the original level and builds upon it to a tremendous degree. These improved features, as well as the game's own fun mechanics, make it such a fun speedrun. So, let's talk about it, shall we? Now, the first 10 to 15 seconds of the stage seem like they'd be fairly linear and straightforward. To the average player, it might be, but with a keen eye and a good understanding of the game's mechanics, we can take a little turn just before hitting this first ring and skip the entire grinding section using the Chaos Spear technique. Now, I'm gonna fail this miserably because I'm trash, but you get the idea. Moving along, the player is greeted with several paths. The optimal method is to bounce yourself up with this rope, hit this flying enemy, and land in a specific spot to line yourself up for a Chaos Spear boost jump. Launching yourself with this at a specific angle allows you to hit a spring and completely skip a few seconds of bouncing through a rope section. Immediately after, you'll want to hit this group of enemies in a very specific way that I won't explain. It's a secret! To fill up your Chaos Control meter. Don't use it quite yet, we'll want to save it for later. Once you get to the end of the wall running section, you'll want to quickly launch yourself over to this rail section. For a little time save, launch yourself backwards off the rail to get into the tunnel faster. Boost through the tunnel and use your Chaos Control around the time you exit. This will fill up your boost gauge and allow you to keep your speed on the following rail. Now we enter the first water section. Can I just say Doomsurf is such an upgrade compared to Shadow's water vehicle from 06? It feels so much better to control. The section here is fairly straightforward. Press the boost button whenever you enter the water to get a burst of speed, play optimally, and make sure you have at least 3 of 5 charges for Chaos Control when you leave the section. You'll want to take the top path to get to the tower and hit these enemies before grinding on the rail, like I almost failed to do. At this point, you should have enough charges to use Chaos Control, which you'll be able to keep going until you reach the top. Here you'll find your next big skip. See this red enemy? When you Doom Blast him, aim just past the left of the tower. This will allow you to skip the entire section within the building and save some major time. Make sure you don't use Chaos Control from this immediately either. On the following Doomsurf section, wait to use Chaos Control until you're close enough to break this window. Follow the path until you reach the end of the grind rail section with the ring on it. If you use the Chaos Spear technique in a well-timed boost, you'll be able to maintain enough momentum to skip an entire rail section and then some by landing on this tower. You could do a similar strat you just used to launch yourself into these rings too, and carry on the stage. Shortly after, you'll find yourself at another ring. You can once again use the Chaos Spear technique to launch yourself and skip an automated eagle section. You have some leeway as to where you can land, but I find it easiest to aim for the bridge below, although I'm sure there's much faster routes. On to the final major skip of the stage. After entering the last Doomsurf section, make sure you don't use Chaos Control until the red enemy is out in the open. Use Chaos Control and Doom Blast the enemy, hopefully successfully, up onto this higher platform. Make your way over to these crates and wait for your Chaos Control to charge again before breaking them. Here's a quick tip. If you activate Chaos Control before getting another capsule, such as the one in these crates, you'll be able to use the ability a second time immediately after. Jump into the stream and use your second Chaos Control when you can. Now all you have to do from here is play optimally and you're at the end of the stage. I'm sure there's plenty of better tricks I missed, or ones that I could do more efficiently, but this is pretty much everything I've gathered so far from playing the stage. Quite the fun level if I say so myself. You should give it a try. Sorry if I sound weird, I'm kind of sick right now, it sucks.
Now, I'm not really someone who tends to speedrun Sonic games. More so, I tend to do the likes of a semi-speedrun, if that's even a thing. Basically, what I mean is that I tend to play stages in the way that the developers intended to play, with what the game offers, and utilising them to find the fastest path and getting the best rank possible, without purposely breaking the level, of course. For Shadow Generations, I personally prefer to play the stages without relying on the Doom Wings. I don't know, it just seems more fun to play as base Shadow and having to rely more on my skills as a Sonic player to maximise on the core gimmicks that the game presents me to use. When it comes to the levels, I pretty much like every stage, including the 2D acts. They all have great level design, but there's one stage I'm finding myself to replay the most, and that stage is Sunset Heights. Back in the early days of Sonic Force's release, there were two stages that I focused on getting a faster time: Mortar Canyon and Sunset Heights. So it seemed fitting to speedrun the newer adaptation. Sunset Heights in Shadow Generations is a interesting level that so far has me replaying to further improve my time. Mainly, it is a vastly superior version that overhauls the vanilla forces, and honestly, it's what it should have been in the original. Also, Act 1 of Sunset Heights is more focused on pure speed with little platforming required, that you can even skip over the platforming by boost jumping over rather than the supposed way of platforming across to progress through the act. I know that you have probably seen other people do speedrunning way better, but the way I see it, I'm beating the stage much quicker than the average player who runs through it on the normal playthrough. So to me, that's my viewpoint of a speedrun. For my run of Sunset Heights, I mainly focus on maintaining my boost and only attacking enemies to fill up my Chaos Control meter, and then use my Chaos Control as soon as it is full to pause the in-game timer and rinse and repeat. Making use of Chaos Control is very important when routing out when to use your Chaos Controls to gain the best time possible, especially when you abuse the capsule glitch. It's clearly an unintentional exploit that you can take advantage of, but man, being able to basically get 2 Chaos Controls for the price of 1 is honestly pretty satisfying, and combo that with destroying enemies to fill up your meter while you're still in Chaos Control to use it immediately again and repeat the cycle. It makes me feel invincible, or possibly undefeatable. Haha, get it? Because it's a Frontiers reference. I know that you can take advantage of using the Chaos Spears while in the air to gain some distance, but I only really used it once at the beginning to skip having to jump over a simple step. I'm sure there are other moments where you could use Chaos Spears to save some time, but I haven't really experimented with it enough, as I'm only focused on boosting and freezing the in-game time. I always try to stomp when I'm in the air as often as possible to reach the ground quicker so that I can boost off, saving me time instead of having to wait to fall slowly before progressing onwards. As soon as we get to Doom's influence of changing the level to his favourite stage, Radical Highway, because it's a pretty cool stage according to him, I mainly focus on boosting while collecting rings and avoiding enemies as much as possible to save time, since you can't use Chaos Control during these sections. Pretty much I either boost past enemies or into them if they are in my way as the ultimate life form. It's easier and quicker to do that rather than just homing attack into them, provided you have enough boost to do so. Also continuing to skip more platforming sections by boosting and jumping around and past them to save more time and get me back to boosting as soon as possible. So yeah, I really enjoy going fast in Sunset Heights. At the end of the day, I can get under sub 3 minutes 30, even sub 3 minutes 25 seconds, which is better than my first initial run of being Sunset Heights in around, 4 minutes and 40 seconds or something, and I am more than satisfied with my run of Sunset Heights in Shadow Generations, and that's why I like to speedrun this level. Take that, Mr. Lag and JustMaxT!
Sigma, on the wall. Who's the rizziest of them all? G-Dub, if you want to, you can put this part in the video. The best way I can describe Chaos Island Act 1 and Shadow Generations is basically saying that it's a modern day version of Red Mountain for multiple reasons. One, this level just obviously is the mountain lava area, and two, this level, to me at least, feels the most like an adventure level. There's actually very few moments where you're actually holding the boost button. A lot of it is just like platforming and like really meticulous jumps. And this level, to me, just gave me the biggest adventure vibe out of all of the levels in the game. Now, when it comes to speedrunning, holy Jesus, it is so meticulous and so accurate that it's not even human. And I know that's like a lot of speedruns, but I felt it the most with this one because, like I mentioned previously, there is not a lot of moments where you're just holding boost and going straight. Every single minute and second of this level, you are constantly switching your direction or pressing this input to do a spear dash or just doing something different. You're never doing one thing for even a second. The longest you're ever just like doing nothing is if you choose to take the zip line down, which is not even optimal, so you wouldn't even be doing that. Every minute that you're playing this level, you're constantly just locked in and focused. And just starting off with the first section of the level, you're already starting off with the Doom Morph. And once you get to that first spring by jumping over the wall, right away you can see what I mean by you do not stop for a second to do one thing. Already, you have to get these two enemies, homing attack them, and then spear attack this switch to activate these platforms, to spawn in these other enemies, to homing attack them, to then homing attack this pulley, to then get to the 5th enemy to charge up your chaos control. All while making sure that you hit the ground before you homing attack the other 2 enemies, because if you don't, you will not get your boost back and you will be wasting time. And then right away, as soon as you hit the ground, you have to boost sharply to the left, and it's at this point where you have to use the Chaos Spear Dash, which I'm pretty sure other people have mentioned already. But just to give you a quick refresher, basically when you use that Chaos Spear in the air, you lose no momentum, so you keep your max speed, and you go through this while boosting. And by the time you hit the platform on the left, you use Chaos Control to slow down time. It's at this point where you have to homing attack the enemies in front of you again, and then skip all the balloons to get to the spring, to homing attack the other 2 enemies to again refill your chaos control meter. And then this is where it gets fun. You start to really use that chaos spear attack, because here you have to make this big gap. And in order to do that, you have to spam the chaos dash. And before you do that, you have to use chaos control. And it's here where we get this really cool feature where, because once you reach that gap, you get to another chaos control capsule. And if you're really quick and you time the chaos control perfectly with the next one, you get an additional chaos control. But you have to be exact with this, because if you're not, then you only get it partially filled. But then you continue using the Chaos Spear Dash to clear more gaps. And here is the first master tech. You have to skip this loop because it will save you a lot of time. Now here what you want to do is you really have 2 ways. You either do it the easier way and jump over the boost panel and then do it, or you can do it by going on the boost panel and doing it quicker. But in both ways, what you want to do is you want to line yourself up exactly with the other end. You want to jump, Chaos Spear, then boost and Chaos Spear, and then at the last point, you want to jump so you land on the other side. That will save you a solid 3 seconds on your run. Now continuing forward, some people here either decide to keep going straight and get the enemies on the other end, but here I find it more efficient for me just to take the enemy on the right and then go dash back down to the left and then continue forward. Now here is a quick speedrun track. Instead of using the Doom Morph to swing up, or even hitting the spring on the left bottom area and then using the balloons, you just want a Chaos Spear Dash all the way to the end to hit the spring. Now here, once we get to this rail, is another crazy tech. Since in this game they nerfed the rail jump, here you want to jump off the rail at the exact perfect time to then do a Chaos Spear Dash so that you can skip a lot of the rail, and that saves you like another 2 seconds. And then from here, this is like the only part where you're really holding boost to get to the other end, but then after that, it's straight back to high octane action. And I would say here the last big tech is that you want to time your Chaos Spear perfectly on this rail to hit the switch so that the pulley comes down, because if you're too late, since you're in chaos control here, it will not reach it and you'll just be wasting your time. And that's pretty much the big last thing. After that, you just have to time your chaos controls pretty well and make sure you do the right jumps, and you'll get to the end of the level. Here with this run, I did a 134, but I could have done it so much better if I took in faster routes or was just more efficient. But I love this speedrun so much, more than any Sonic game I've ever played in recent memory, because you're constantly engaged with not just the level design, but with the mechanics. Like I said before, there is not a minute where you're really just holding boost besides that one rail section. Every other moment of this level, you are constantly pressing buttons or doing inputs. It feels so involved, so when you get that S rank, you're like, damn, I earned that. If it wasn't for Radical Highway just being a better level, this would have been my #1 level of the game, and this is for sure a top 5 level in my Sonic game history. But that's all I have to say.
All great video games have a strong beginning, middle, and end. But in my personal opinion, out of those 3, the ending is the most important. The ending will decide how you're left feeling after beating the game. And when it comes to Shadow Generations, it's safe to say that yep, the game definitely delivered on its ending. And part of that is helped by its great final level, Radical Highway Act 2. What makes Radical Highways Act 2 more significant and impactful than the previous Act 2s is the fact that it's fully 3D this time around. Even though having 2D in a modern Sonic game isn't necessarily a bad thing when it's done right, 3D will always be more interesting because you can just do so much more visually and level design wise. And on top of that, being in 3D increases the possibilities for speedrunning, because 2D in Shadow Generations is significantly slower than 3D, meaning that the new Chaos Spear technique that people have been using nowadays is a whole lot more effective in the third dimension. So now not only do you have to worry about the X and Y axis, but now also the Z axis, meaning that a lot more skill is going to be required to speedrun these stages, and in my personal opinion, something that's more challenging is automatically going to become more fun for me because it requires more skill and mastery to complete. So let's actually talk about how speedrunning Radical Highway Act 2 is so much fun. Starting off with the first skydiving section of this stage, and I've got to say, the skydiving sections in Shadow Generations might be some of the best ones in the entire series, because in these skydiving sections, there is more than just one place for you to actually go ahead and land. Made evident by the first pathway in this stage in the skydiving section, immediately, you do not press the boost button to go faster because you need to take your time to realise that, hang on, there's a pathway above me. And at the same time, you've also got to realise that there's enemies for you to actually use the Doom Spears on. And just like that, only 3 seconds of gameplay into the stage, we already have so much to think about, and thankfully it does not just stop there. The next little rail section here allows for even more optimization, because we can now pull out the sacred technique of the Chaos Spears to do a fast launch off of a rail to avoid a homing attack chain. And of course, there are plenty of places to avoid doing a homing attack chain in this game, but I like a specific version of it because it requires you to actually land on a small rail while going at high speed. It's very easy to mess it up here, but when you actually manage to pull it off, it is so satisfying. The next major part of the stage is once again a skydiving section, and once again, just like the previous one, there are multiple places for you to actually land here. But this time they switch you up because in this scenario, the secret pathway isn't above the main one, it's actually below it this time, and because of the lighting, the rail is actually quite dark here, so it actually kind of blends in with the background, so if you're not looking carefully, you're gonna actually miss this rail. Following this section, the dooming starts to make its appearance in this level, as we get 2 mini-boss sections where we have to avoid some wind in the air. And the first one isn't that interesting, but the second one, you can actually avoid it entirely by just flying over it. Boom. But it isn't that easy because obviously you gotta remember that whilst you're actually flying in the air, the boost gauge is depleting, so you gotta make sure to manage your boost very well to pull off this skip. We then run into another splitting pathway, and once again the cool little skip will actually do on this rail here. It's not that big of a skip, but if you jump off this rail before you hit the dash pad or whatever, you can actually home attack the spring, so saves like less than a second, but it's still fun to do nonetheless. Then we have another Sonic Lost World section with these tubes here with once again another splitting pathway, and then we come up on my favourite skip in this entire stage. If you manage your boost well, you can actually skip this entire section by just using the Doom Wings to go ahead and fly on top of this loop here, which you can then use to go fly to a further section, skipping basically all the platforming here. And usually I'd say skipping platforming by just flying over it is bad game design, but in this scenario, you need skill to do this because you need to actually manage your boost properly, because if not, you'll end up falling to your doom. And with that is pretty much the end of the stage, so all around, a pretty great ending stage to Shadow Generations. You've got nice visuals, some interesting music, and some pretty good difficulty here, meaning that speedrunning it is even more fun as stated earlier.
So there we have it. That is why Shadow Generations is so fun to replay from a ton of different perspectives of your favorite creators. So thank you all for watching, and huge thank you also to the creators being willing to do this. You guys are awesome. So I hope all of you have an amazing rest of your day. God bless.